I would like to introduce Mr. Robert Waterhouse. He is a program manager in the industry development and support at Energy Safety Canada in Calgary, and he will be presenting an overview of Fitness for Duty, a program development guideline. So, Robert, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks,
and Robert,
Brad.
we know you have a poll question. Just let us know when you want to release that, and we'll get right on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should be good. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can. Looks great.
Awesome. All right. Open to my original Zoom button here. Disappeared on me for some reason. All right. Fit for duty. So I think it was around 2016 we actually set off on this endeavor as an industry to put some effort into Fit for Duty. We had historically done a fair bit of things within the industry in various other capacities, like alcohol and drugs, for example, with the Canadian model, or fatigue management. However, we were seeing that, in discussions with industry companies, that there was a lot of, other factors that were coming to play relative to workers, and particularly system factors. So things, we have a tendency to try to want to optimize people, and there's certainly value in that. And, coping strategies and stuff are excellent, like our last presenter talking about sort of mindfulness and whatnot. And we actually on this document have some stuff on that as well. However, what we were seeing is there was a lot of other factors that are just playing into the environment that the worker works in, and why they sort of are having some of the challenges that they do. And so, we put this document together to as a guideline to kind of help people to get them thinking a little bit broader about some of this. And certainly, when you think about the different conversations we've had today, thinking a bit more holistically about all these different variables that exist, that are factors that influence sort of a worker's overall sort of fitness for work. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. So I just thought I'd begin with a little grass story. So I had a competition a couple years back with my neighbor. We had some pretty nice lawns, and we thought, hey, you know what, let's have a competition. Let's see who can have the best lawn at the end of the year. And basically what ended up happening is I ended up grabbing the wrong bottle. I grabbed Roundup and I sprayed my weeds with Roundup. Needless to say, I didn't win the competition. However, if you look at contextually what was going on at the time, I had worked a full shift week out in the field and come back into for late Friday night, got up Saturday and had a whole swack of family related things to do, and was going back out, getting on a plane 6 a.m. Monday morning, and then the evaluation for us with the date we had picked was the following weekend. So I was like, this is my last chance to do anything with the weeds this weekend if I want to put any effort into the grass. And so make a long story short, basically it was Sunday night. It was like 10 o'clock. I had not been able to literally scrape out 5 minutes of time anywhere during the weekend, predominantly because I had been away for an extended period of time in the field. And so that meant that there were a whole range of things that I needed to do, similar to some of the worker panel discussions that you heard about yesterday. I went into the garage and I grabbed the bottle, and I was kind of agitated at this point because it was like a small thing, and just to be able to grab 10 minutes of time really didn't seem like it should be that difficult, but in fact it was. And I made a point of actually going, make sure you don't grab the Roundup. I remember saying that to myself, and of course the garage isn't well lit and it's dark outside at this point because it's late at night, and I used Roundup on my grass. So needless to say, I lost the competition. And it took me about well, a good year to get my grasp back to the way that it was looking, with a lot of effort, I might add. For anyone who's probably done this, you know how catastrophic this is. So I thought I'd put this in here just as a little story, just relative to the fact that when we think about, fit for duty, and we think about the other presenters that have talked to today and yesterday, the reality is this is a spectrum of different things, right? And we tend to think of, human error as, being this thing, and then that aren't any of these other factors that are going on at the time. Certainly fatigue was a factor for me, as well as probably distraction and just frustration with the fact that I couldn't find 10 minutes in an entire weekend to do this, until 11 o'clock at night or whatever. Anyway, so something to think about and reflect on as we go through these slides. Just a story here from some work we did with Threads of Life. It's an organization that basically works with family survivors of workplace tragedy. Story here about Blaine, who was moving a service rig along a treacherous highway with minimal shoulder and very deep ditches, and somehow on this busy road where truckers and school buses compete for space, his truck veered off towards the ditch. He tried to correct and come out, but the pump truck rolled and Blaine was crushed and ultimately died. And in the end, we really don't know what happened there, and there's a lot of different theories, but it just speaks to some of the challenges that we have and the hazardous energy that we're trying to manage on a day-to-day basis. And so basically, we'll talk a little bit about fit for duty and some of the stuff that we've sort of done there in relation to life-saving rules, which focuses on being physically and mentally in a state to perform work. So why fit for duty? Actually, Brad, if you want to pop up the poll question now, and I'll just speak in general and as people fill that out. The question is, when I think of fit for duty, I mostly think of equipment issues, worker issues, system issues, or environmental issues. So make your selection there and give you a few minutes. So we know that fatigue, alcohol, drugs, mental health, and a variety of other stressors impact both worker performance and health and safety. And a lot of times, right, relative to other speakers today, have talked about a lot about fatigue management and certainly alcohol and drugs and other things, right? And we tend to manage these things in isolation of each other. Well, we've got the fatigue program and we've got the alcohol drug program, but do we actually have a program that actually looks at the much broader sort of holistic sort of set of all of these different things? So that, I don't know if you can see, Brad, how many people have voted there, if you want maybe share the results. All right, so we got 3% with equipment issues, 83% worker issues, 14% system issues, and 1% environment issues. Interesting. So I'm going to challenge your thinking on this a little bit. This is kind of what I expected. Certainly historically, we've spent a lot of time sort of trying to optimize workers and looking at that, and less so looking at the environment and looking at different system related issues. And so the opportunity for us moving forward is certainly to not necessarily stop doing those things that we've been doing. And there's still opportunities in that space as well, as you heard from, just the last speaker. But to really look at some of this other stuff that's a little bit more difficult to deal with, but certainly has a big influence over what workers do, right? So perfect. Thanks for that. Probably close that down. So I just got this video I'll play here. Just give me a quick thumbs up, someone, just to tell me you can hear it when I hit play. Oops, sorry, that was me.
Thank you for seeing us, Doctor. Our daughter is not feeling very well.
I see. Well, let's have a look at you.
Now take a deep breath for me. Good. Has she been coughing?
Yes, a little.
Is she taking any medication?
No.
Have you applied for a mortgage before?
Huh?
And are you applying alone or with your spouse?
With my wife.
Okay, great. I'd like you to fill out these forms and call the kids downstairs.
Okay. Why?
Because dinner is ready.
Okay.
Where will your family stay when they come here for Rupinder's wedding?
I don't know.
Are they all gonna stay here? Raj.
Raj?
Raj?
Raj!
Raj?
Raj!
Raj!
Raj! Raj!
Raj?
Raj!
Life is full of distractions. Cutting
Yeah, so that's certainly an interesting job. Not something I would particularly want to do. Not probably a lot of capacity to fail safely in that particular setup there. But a great example of some of the challenges that that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? So this is basically looking at the mental health claims, most recent data from the 3 Western provinces relative to oil and gas activity in Western Canada. You know, as we've had other people talk about psychological health and safety and whatnot, mental health, well-being, certainly we can see that we've had some definite increases here over the last recent years. And part of this is because we've made the system a little bit more friendly for claims to be accepted, so that's good. Part of it is awareness, part of it is just the challenges that we've been dealing with in recent years, and certainly going back into a few years past, right, with some of the oil and gas downturns and stuff that have definitely created some mental health challenges for folks. So this is the environment. Certainly as we go forward, I would suspect as we have more education and more awareness on this, we'll probably still see an increase in this space for some time before maybe we see some declines, but it's hard to know with the crystal ball, right? So the stats versus reality. The reality is that we don't collect a lot of great data on this as at individual company levels. We have limitations at an industry level. We don't have a lot of great data when it comes to what was happening at the time relative to an individual worker, what was going on in their head at the moment of an incident, say, for example. And even when it comes to lagging and leading indicators, a lot of companies basically don't think too much in this space, at least not historically anyway. Certainly that's been changing over the years here more recently. So that's certainly positive. The common practice that you see very commonly, which is sort of reflective of some of the presentations, tends to be more alcohol and drugs and fatigue. That are the two pieces that if you said, hey, you have a fit for duty program, people would say, yes, yeah, we manage fatigue and we've got a drug and alcohol program. And of course, all of those things can look very different, right? I mean, whether you're talking about hours of service regulations or whether you're talking about what the industry does as a whole, what your clients' expectations are versus yours, can vary. So it's a patchwork of some variation as you move throughout the industry and throughout different companies. When you think about different things that fit for duty can have an impact on, you can think of things like pacemakers. If you're working around magnetic pumps, maybe you have a pregnant worker and you're working with around reproductive toxins, carbon monoxide, toluene, radiation, things of that nature. Maybe you have workers fasting, right? We just recently had Ramadan. Think about driver's license and maybe reduced vision or phobias that workers might have. Maybe fear of getting into a small space like confined spaces and how that plays into your work. Reduced ability to handle stress because of family challenges, sort of similar to what we just saw in the video. Chemical impact, right? Working with a chemical can impact your fitness for work. And maybe your only defense is a respirator. working in remote locations by themselves for extended periods of time. Certainly you can hear of like people that get like cabin fever, if you want to call it that. And working in an unfamiliar environment or country can certainly have some definite implications. And then, of course, then you've got all of this combined together, right? So mental, physical, physiological, all these stressors all playing out, which create, a whole soup of challenges in the mix. So we set out on this definite to set a definition, and what we came to when we published this work, which would have been, I think it was 2019, somewhere around there. A condition in which an employee's physical, physiological, and psychological state enables them to continuously perform assigned tasks safely. So this definition is an umbrella strategy. And really what we wanted to do is we said, we want to put our arms out and kind of like encompass all these different things, from things like physical demands analysis, vision and hearing, to fatigue, alcohol and drugs, workplace exposures, commitment, risk tolerance, emotional state, culture, if you're in a different part of province or different part of a state or country, there's certainly some nuanced differences if you go from Texas to, say, California, for example, and you're working in the oil and gas industry. There's there's some subtleties there that you pick up on, right? And so this is kind of what that looks like if you think about that sort of revised house where we move from fatigue and drug and alcohol to much more broader perspective. And then we also included communication, because communication is such an important sort of foundation of all of this, because very often you for some of these things, you may not actually know whether there's any problems without communication, right? I mean, very often in by talking to workers, you pick up on little weak signals of things that go, hey, I don't know, John seems a little funny today, so on and so forth. So when we talk about human or systems focus, where is your focus, right? When we look at the poll results, obviously there's a lot of focus on the worker, right? And so I would sort of say, I would challenge folks on the call today to think more about social psychology, complexity, systems as it relates to these topics. That's certainly where the sort of next frontier and opportunity is. There's only so much optimization of workers we can do, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of system and other issues that are there that are worth taking a look at, and you can make a difference on. So we tend to start off in our sort of evolutionary progress in this space more on the human performance side, looking at physical abilities, vision, hearing, fatigue, alcohol and drugs, maybe phobias, things of that nature. And then as you progress all along this sort of journey, you start, looking at some of these other things where you start looking at, maybe respectful workplace and violence and harassment. You start looking at like workplace exposures, for example. I mean, workplace exposures are connected to fit for duty. But 25% of the TLVs are actually connected to, central nervous system impairment, narcosis, things of that nature. If you're basically getting high on hydrocarbons, for example, that's a fit for duty issue. And I don't know if we necessarily always think about it that way, but those are more system issues. If you have those type of exposures occurring in your workplace, telling the worker to, be safe or whatever, or manage fatigue and things of that nature is not going to solve those problems, right? I mean, you need to actually have proper systems in place and controls, and you need to have, understand the nature of those hazards in your workplace, for example. So we created a fit for duty life-saving rule, and the intent around this isn't to be, you might sort of say, well, how do you do this? How do you go out and measure this? And that's sort of not the intent per se around the life-saving rules explicitly. It's more of an opportunity to start a broader conversation with your workers and say, hey, you know what, we want to have some conversations around being physically and mentally in a state to perform assigned duties, and informing your supervisor if you or someone else, is unfit, right? And say, hey, you know what, I'm just totally distracted right now. I've got a lot of challenges at home, like I'm not the person that needs to be doing this tandem crane lift today, right? So we want to encourage those kind of conversations between workers and supervisors and colleagues, and basically surface that stuff so that you can manage it, right? So the identification and management of an unfit sort of individual, there's a lot of different things you can certainly look for, but obviously deterioration in appearance or personal hygiene, unable to conduct assigned work, or it hurts to do so, for example, in the physiological section, thinking about, difficulty staying awake or persistent excessive yawning, dizziness, slurred speech, obviously inability to stand, things of that nature. And then, the psychological piece, to get into irritability, inappropriate responses or behaviors, forgetfulness, judgment errors, difficulty in staying focused. And when it comes to, dealing with these things, right? I mean, the reality is that you want to basically notify a supervisor or someone who's in a position of authority, and they really need to go and actually look into that. Because it may be that, that's just John, he's always that way. You don't realize that that's just the way he is. It might be the way he approaches conversations or whatever. You might see it as a problem where he might be like, well, that's just the way he conducts himself, right? So you do need that inquiry and confirmation component. And then obviously, if you have, as an organization, you need to have programs around how you're going to manage these things and policies. When you get into drug and alcohol and things of that nature, obviously there's a whole bunch of legal sort of implications, and you need to, if you're gonna write something down, you need to actually, live that document, or you put yourself in sort of legal jeopardy in the process of doing that. So when it comes to a risk assessment in this space, there's a lot of different things that you can look at. Certainly physical work, safety sensitivity, driving, workplace exposures, fatigue, confrontational work environments is a big one. We all know, like, hey, you know what, that job over there with that particular client maybe is a bit more challenging. So we're going to set up, this rig manager to, conduct that work versus this other one that's maybe newer or maybe not a good fit. So working alone, unfamiliar environments, access to food and water, and even, when you think of like remote working, access to washroom facilities. I mean, in the onshore environment in oil and gas, particularly in some remote locations, that can be a real concern. And you may not think about it much, but the reality is that if you don't have access to that, it can definitely impact people. I mean, I've certainly seen and talked to lots of gals in the industry who had some interesting conversations around this. Where they don't drink any water because they don't want to have to go to the bathroom. So, this stuff exists in our workplace right now. Whether you know it or not is another matter, right? So we need to make sure that, the necessities are taken care of. So there is a bow tie exercise or a bow tie diagram on our, it's part of the guideline. I won't go into that just in the interest of time here, but this is not about blaming workers. This is about helping people, creating capacity, and setting workers and companies up for success in the safe execution of work. So do your workers and controls have capacity to handle a failure? Certainly, when you think back to the video with WorkSafe BC, I go, man, if that guy loses focus, he could certainly cut a finger or a hand or something, worse maybe. And one of the things I'd like to leave you with is just about where are the rumble strips? You think of rumble strips on the side of the road that kind of alert you, that you're drifting off the road, pay attention. I'd like you just to leave with that conversation, to think about rumble strips as it pertains to different types of activities and operations that you have in your company, and where you might be able to put in sort of attention activators, or sort of weak signals that could be providing some feedback to you about, how well things are going in your operations as it relates to, fitness for work, distraction, things of that nature. Questions, thoughts, comments?
Thanks, Robert. We appreciate that. A couple of comments have come in, just, appreciating the holistic approach that you guys are taking with this. Are there additional resources on Energy Safety Canada related to this program guideline that people can take a look at and, potentially model within their own companies? Or what kind of resources do you guys have related to this that you've developed?
So there's the guideline. There's a couple toolbox talks. There's some fit for duty sort of wallet cards. We also have tied to it as well. So I'll post that in the chat here real quick for folks.
Yeah, that would be great. I don't see any other questions. Did anybody have any last minute questions that they wanted to ask Robert? A couple comments coming in just saying that they thought the presentation was really on point, and that they likened this to how burnout causality is now moving away from just focusing on the canary in the coal mine to addressing the environment in the mine itself. And then also kind of a comment that when we discuss fitness for duty, clinicians should also consider work history, genetic predispositions, and family history in the analysis, in addition to kind of some of the issues that you've talked about as well. So I don't know if you had any additional comments related to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's a very complex topic, and I certainly think it's worthwhile for folks to look at these different factors that exist in your operations and others too, right? I mean, at the time we do talk about vaccination in there, and we did actually have a conversation about in relation to vaccination and what later became COVID, right? Because if you read this guideline now, you'll go back and say, okay, there's you might change what was in there relative to COVID. That certainly changed lots of different things in our society. So certainly COVID was a big part of this conversation around fit for duty. I mean, obviously, if you had COVID and you came to site, that would be a fit for duty problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then you even get into the whole vaccination piece too, right? So, and then there's vaccinations in numerous different countries that you need for a variety of different things, right? So, yellow fever and the list goes on, right? So, I think the encouraging people to be more system focused and be more encouraged to look at the environment that workers are in, and recognize that those things have a big influence and drive contextually, the situation. And asking workers to, optimize their performance is fine, but they can only basically perform as good as the conditions that they're given, right? So,
yeah. One last question before we'll end. Do you have any metrics to evaluate this systems approach?
We do talk a little bit about that in the guide. Briefly, we just talk about maybe, breaking down sort of incident investigations into, things where there's physiological, or psychological components. We recognize that that's some of the challenges that exist, is a lot of people don't want to, for privacy reasons, capture this detail at a granular level, but we felt that probably doing it at that higher level probably would make sense and would give you at least some sense of what was going on over time. Whereas historically, a lot of people don't sort of capture that information, and so they're not looking at these factors from a learning perspective of where they might be able to improve or beef up programs and so on and so forth.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Robert. We appreciate you presenting this, and we look forward to looking at the resources that you all have pulled together on this topic. So we appreciate that. All right, that brings us to the end of our summit. I just wanted to thank all of our presenters and all of the attendees who have participated over the last 2 days for this year's Spring Health and Safety Summit. A lot of people have asked us for PDF copies of the presentations. We're trying to pull those together. But if you do want to reach out to the individual presenter, you're more than welcome to. I have put in a couple of files in the chat with those emails, or if you didn't get a chance to do that, you're more than welcome to email us at NIOSH here at the following email. It's Nora, N-O-R-A, OGE Summit at cdc.gov. And then also just a reminder that the videos from probably most, if not all of the presenters who have consented to have their presentations recorded for future viewing will be placed on the Center for Health, Work and Environment. There's the link on the previous page, and on this, this is what the page would look like. It has the videos from past years on it as well. And just one last note to say, you will be asked to fill out an evaluation form. And at the end of the evaluation, there is a place for your name and email. You will need to fill that out for a certificate of attendance to be sent to you to document attendance. There was a note that somebody had noticed that there was an incorrect date on it. So I just wanted to pass along the information that if you have any questions or want to have a copy of that certificate sent to you, we can do that as well. I think Courtney at the Center for Health, Work and Environment said that they did plan on sending certificates to everyone via email who completes the form in the next week, just to make sure that those dates are correct as well. So on behalf of the NIOSH Oil and Gas Research Program and the NORA Oil and Gas Extractor Sector Council, we just wanted to thank you again for your participation, and we hope you will join us for next year's Spring Health and Safety Summit in 2024. So have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you very much.